Somewhere between the strategy deck and the shop floor, retail lost a decade. Not to bad strategy, to good org charts. Every restructuring that promised efficiency took another layer of middle management with it. The IADS white paper argues that the people who disappeared are now the most needed, that they're the ones who turn an AI rollout from an announcement into something a store team can actually use, and that retail has been calling them overhead when it should have been calling them unicorns. I'm Maya, and this is IADS Retail Park, a podcast by the International Association of Department Stores. Christine Montard is Director of Markets and Events at IADS and the author of the white paper we're unpacking today, a piece that opens with a provocation retail's been avoiding for years. Christine, the white paper calls middle managers unicorns, which is either the most generous thing the industry has ever said about them or the most damning. Let's start there.
Thanks for having me back on the show, and I am happy to begin our discussion there. I think the tension you named in the intro is the right place to start, because there's a real gap between what middle managers are perceived to do and what they actually do. The perception is that they're relaying information, maybe managing schedules, keeping things running. The reality is that they're simultaneously translating corporate strategy into daily action, monitoring performance, building and motivating teams, and acting as the communication bridge between people who rarely speak to each other. That's four completely different jobs. And the people doing all four rarely get recognized for any of them.
And the communication piece specifically, that stood out to me in the white paper, Christine, because when middle managers get written off, you lose something that's very hard to rebuild, that two-way translation between what leadership wants and what frontline teams are actually experiencing.
That's probably the most underappreciated function they have. Senior leadership sets the direction, and frontline teams execute. But the middle manager is the one who makes those two realities connect. They hear from the floor what's working and what isn't, and they translate that back upward in a way that leadership can act on. When you thin out that layer, you don't just lose a level of management, you lose the feedback loop. And that's when strategies start failing in implementation for reasons nobody at the top can quite diagnose.
There's a McKinsey finding in the white paper that stopped me. 75% of people say their manager is the most stressful part of their job. Not the workload, not the hours, the manager, which cuts both ways. A bad middle manager can hollow out an entire team, but a good one seems to multiply impact across everyone below them.
That stat lands differently depending on which side of it you're on. The white paper frames it as employees don't leave companies, they leave managers. And that's a real retention issue for retail, where the cost of turnover, especially frontline turnover, is enormous. But the reverse is equally true and maybe more important. A middle manager who creates psychological safety, who gives their team room to make decisions, who advocates upward, that person has a measurable effect on engagement, productivity, and customer experience. The white paper puts middle management as 80% leadership and 20% management, which is a useful frame. Most organizations treat it the opposite way.
So, given that, Christine, what does the white paper actually recommend? Because invest in middle management is easy to say and hard to operationalize.
The first thing is to stop treating promotion as the only form of recognition. Retail tends to reward good middle managers by moving them out of what they're good at, pulling them into the C-suite or into roles that are entirely different from where they were creating value. The white paper lays out a set of alternatives, expanding scope without changing the title, offering compensation that genuinely reflects impact, even at C-suite levels for exceptional middle managers, involving them in strategic decisions, giving them challenging assignments outside their daily routine. The idea is to recognize performance in ways that keep the person in the role where they're most effective, not just move them upward because that's the conventional signal of success.
And then there's the mentoring piece, which I found genuinely interesting because it's positioned not just as a training tool, but as a culture driver.
Peer mentoring in particular. The idea is that middle managers are navigating pressures that are specific to their position. They can't always take those to senior leadership, and they're not always appropriate to discuss with their teams. Having a structured space to work through those challenges with peers who understand the context is something the white paper describes as genuinely underutilized. It builds resilience, improves communication skills, and creates a network of trust across departments that pays dividends for the whole organization.
And then you also touch on AI, which feels like the layer that changes everything about this conversation going forward.
The white paper's position on AI and middle management is that it's not a threat to the role, it's actually an opportunity to redefine it. Middle managers spend a disproportionate amount of time on administrative work, compiling reports, tracking data, scheduling. If AI absorbs that, they get back time for what they're uniquely positioned to do: reading their teams, solving problems, guiding people through change. And that last one is particularly relevant right now. Middle managers are the people who are going to determine whether AI tools actually get adopted on the floor. They're the ones with the relationship capital to make that shift happen or to watch it stall. The white paper calls this rebundling, not eliminating the role, but reshaping it so the energy goes where it actually creates value.
What stays with me from this whole conversation, Christine, is the timing paradox. Retail spent a decade flattening the layer that translates, and now it's asking that same layer to translate AI onto the floor. The full white paper maps what middle managers actually do that no one else in the org is positioned to do, and why the ones who survive the cuts are already behaving differently. That's the thread worth pulling. You can read the full exclusive on Substack, and the complete white paper is available on PayHip. We will have links for those who are interested to learn more in the episode description. To stay in the loop, feel free to follow us on LinkedIn at International Association of Department Stores.
Please be advised this podcast features AI clone voices created with human oversight. All content is reviewed by experts for accuracy and relevance.